Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this session. I share my screen. So it's a pleasure to see you all. Welcome to our series of Switch Pitch. My name is Isabel and I'm Community Project Manager from EVPA. And before we start our conversation, I just want to give a few words about our Better Incubation program, just a few words in 3 minutes, so that we are all aligned. And after I will hand over to my colleague Martijn, who is here as well. He's the coordinator of our Impact Funds initiative and also the lead for our Benelux region. And so he's going to continue by moderating this conversation of today and also introduce our speaker. But in the meantime, if you would like to rename yourself here on Zoom, so please feel free to add your name and the name of your organization so that we know who you are. So in a few words, the Better Incubation Program is a 2-year program funded by the EU and co-led by 3 actors, the EBN, the Impact Hub, and EVPA. And the goal is really to foster inclusive and social entrepreneurship here in Europe, and by mobilizing and empowering mainstream business support organizations, such as example, incubators and accelerators. And the aim is really to empower them so that they can help in an effective way the social enterprises and potential entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups, for example, migrants, refugees, women, people with disabilities, and others. And it's really to help them grow, grow their business, to have an environment where they can thrive, and also to have better connections with investors. So this is why we have started this work. And to begin with, Better Incubation really started with a strong component, which is the capacity building. And then we continued our work as well with a series of activities where the focus was really on the collaboration dimension. And this is why we have then launched the Switch Pitch series, which enables to have conversations with social investors, but also with impact business support organizations, so that they can share their insights, their mindset, their experience in the collaboration of work, to support these social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who come from underrepresented groups. So I'm happy to hand over to my colleague Martijn, who will then continue the conversation and also introduce our speaker of today. But maybe we can also take a little time for everyone just to briefly share who you are, where you're from, which country, and which organization you represent. So please feel free to turn on your screen, and maybe I'm just going to go in the order that I see here on my screen. No, otherwise we can continue with Daniel Rostrup.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm based here in London. I work for Sattva Consulting, a global South impact intermediary. And I used to work at EVPA many years ago. So I'm very happy to represent a member this time and be here with all of you.
Thank you. And now I see also Chiara again, if you would like to share.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm traveling, as you might guess. I'm on a train reaching Impact Hub Milano, where we are running today a regional policy workshop of the Better Incubation Program. So I would say they dedicated almost fully to Better Incubation. I'm project manager at EBN, the European Business Innovation Center Network, therefore representing, let's say, the business support organization side. And yes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Now I see Franziska.
Hi, I'm Francesca Pallare, and I'm working in a social incubator accelerator of Italy that is a Cube. It is an advisor of an investment fund that is high impact.
Thank you. Carolina?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Carolina. I'm working at EVPA currently as a policy and EU partnership analyst.
Thank you. I have next Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Verpey. I represent Reach for Change. I'm personally located in Riga, Latvia, but our organization is founded in Sweden. And we support local social entrepreneurs, primarily whose solutions are making lives better for children and youth. And yeah, other programs as well, depending on the market and the context.
Thank you. I see Laneke Rosa.
Hi, can you hear me? Because I have
Yes.
some issues. Okay, great. I had some technical issues, sorry. My name is Lonneke Rosa. I'm the head of community investment of NN Group, a large financial services organization. We focus on financial, fiscal, and mental well-being. And we're currently setting up an impact fund to support also social entrepreneurs next to what we already do with nonprofit organizations. So that's why I was also interested in this session.
Thank you. Marco Traversi.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Marco. I'm running a co-working and incubating space named Dialogue Place in the city of Naples, in the south of Italy. And I also was involved as an expert for social incubation in LIAISE community of practices. Happy to see many of you here.
Thank you. And now I have also Maria Zatelli.
Yes, hi everyone. I actually work with Francesca in a Cube. So yeah, incubator for social enterprises.
Thank you. Thank you everyone and welcome to you all. Now I hand over to Martijn. Thank you, Martijn.
Thank you, Isabella, for this introduction. Welcome everybody to this call. Good to hear where everybody is from and what you're all doing. Great to see some familiar names. Great to see some new names. So, hoping to get to know you better during the course of this session. We'll have plenty of time a bit later on to chat with each other and actually to kind of continue on the conversation and on the presentation. By our esteemed member, Dr. Markus Freiburg. And we are with a small group, so I encourage everyone to keep the videos on and to keep involved and to speak out your questions. But before going to that discussion, I'd like to introduce Markus. Or actually, no, I can try to introduce Markus, but of course, Markus can introduce himself far much better than I ever can. So I think it's good to hand over to Markus directly. And Markus, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Martijn. Thanks a lot, Isabel. Thanks a lot for the kind invitation. I'm really happy to be here. So Markus Freiburg, co-founder and managing director of FASE, Financing Agency for Social Entrepreneurship, that we have set up together with Ashoka, supporting early stage social enterprise and raising growth capital, and also initiator of the EaSI, European Social Innovation and Impact Fund, that we have set up together with a partner to support the funding of social enterprises. And we'll share about that more details in a few seconds. Yeah, and initially I started my career as a management consultant with McKinsey, and that was also the first time when I really got on fire with the concept of social entrepreneurship, and was really excited and privileged to work with Ashoka Fellows and other great social entrepreneurs and helping them advancing their model. And yeah, it's really a pleasure to share a part of our work with you. And the idea would be that in the next 20 minutes, I roughly, let's say, give you an overview about the work that we are doing with FASE and also with the EaSI. Also give some insight into the hybrid financing activities that we are doing. And then, yeah, happy to have a discussion, given that it's a small group. Please feel also free to raise any questions that you might have during the presentation. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay, perfect. So as already quickly indicated, we have set up FASE in 2013 together with Ashoka Germany to support early stage ventures and raising growth capital, and really, let's say, to build bridges between innovative social enterprises and impact investors. And we are basically doing that with 3 pillars. So the first pillar is a kind of corporate finance support that we are giving to social enterprises and impact ventures and raising hybrid growth capital. So typically ventures in pre-Series A, Series A rounds, or something between 500K and 5 million, and really support them as a trusted advisor to the whole funding round. And we have that done now in more than 70 cases, successfully raising more than 50 million euros. And that's basically the first pillar of our activities. And the second pillar is that we also have initiated the EaSI, European Social Innovation and Impact Fund, which is the first fund across Europe providing patient mezzanine capital to social enterprises, and then also benefiting from guarantees from the European Commission under EaSI. And I'll show you the details further on. And the third pillar is that we are also very active in terms of policy advocacy and ecosystem building. Since six years, members of the GICAS group that is supporting the European Commission in questions of social entrepreneurship, social finance. Since a few months, also board member of the EVPA, and also in Germany very active in terms of the National Competence Center for Social Innovation that you might know. These organizations have been supported by the Commission across Europe. Yeah, and that is a bit the background of our activity. So what are we seeing in the market? So on the one hand side, we see that impact investing is experiencing, let's say, extremely strong growth. Just indicatively showing some numbers here from Germany and globally, where we see a strong uptake of the market and already, let's say, a significant size of the impact investing market. However, if you put it into perspective and compare it to the overall assets under management globally and also the total ESG investments, I think it's still fair to say that impact investing, so the idea of investing into enterprises to generate a positive measurable societal impact, is still a niche market, and there's still a lot of potential to move, let's say, more funding towards the sustainable development goals. And why is that a challenge? So from our perspective, part of the challenge is that the majority of the investors is actually waiting at the end of the pipeline. So each and everybody is looking for impact ventures or social enterprises that are around for 5 years, have already 1 million revenue or more, and are already cash positive. So having, let's say, excess cash that they're generating. But the challenge is that not many, let's say, enterprises are at that stage. So we believe that more patient capital at the beginning of the pipeline is needed in order to finance these ventures. And another challenge that we see is related to the return expectations of impact investors. As you can see on the slide, and based on a study from GIN from 2020, actually 85 of the investors globally are looking to financial returns in addition to their impact targets that are close or even above to market rates of return. And that so that only 15% of investors are willing to accept concessional returns. And that, in our view, is a challenge because the majority of the investors, let's say, want to have the cake and eat it, and let's say save the world and beat the market. And that obviously is a challenging value proposition. And we believe that there are many, let's say, great impact ventures out there that are a bit more patient and require a bit more, let's say, patient capital approach, and that not all of these investors are willing to provide. And then what we also see is that many of these early stage social enterprises don't fit into, let's say, traditional financing schemes that are present in the market. So we see that there are mainly 2 dominant mental models established in the market. So one is a for-profit model coming from the startup world, venture capital investing, very focused on exit expectations and looking for market rate of return. So typical 3x in a fund or 10x on an individual investment basis. And on the other hand, there is a non-profit mental model financing scheme that is usually fostered by foundations and philanthropists, where actually no financial return is foreseen, or actually the money is forgiven with minus 100% on the short-term horizon. And we see that often social enterprises, let's say, sit between all chairs and fall between all racks, given that they operate hybrid models and combine for-profit and not-for-profit elements, not always exit-driven, and offer, let's say, more financial returns. So that for them, it's not easy to build those, let's say, financing coalitions, and that they also can't offer, let's say, standard financing models. And we really want to contribute to co-creating and driving pan-European ecosystem for social innovation. And I'm just quoting here Nicola Schmidt, the European Commissioner, regarding the importance of social enterprise and impact ventures for the European economy. So I think the overall importance of the sector is quite clear, but nevertheless, let's say the funding situation and access to financing is still challenging for many social enterprises. And we with FASE also want to contribute towards, let's say, closing or addressing this strategic financing gap, and because we see that especially in an area that, let's say, between 100K and 1 million, which is also called, let's say, Death Valley or missing middle in the literature, that there is a funding gap where it's too large for philanthropic funders or too small for institutional, let's say, social investors, that after an initial, let's say, proof of concept of the companies, there is usually difficult in attracting additional funds. And that initially it's often with family, fools and friends, as there is a nice English saying, then it's difficult to obtain additional funding to finance their growth plans. And we believe that there is significant potential for developing innovative hybrid finance solutions. You basically could have smart combinations of impact investments with philanthropic capital or the use of catalytic instruments. And that is also really what we help social enterprises with FASE to build, let's say, bridges between the social enterprise and impact investors. And it's really a dedicated, let's say, corporate finance advisory support, where we support those ventures often in a 6-month journey over their whole funding cycle. So from an initial review of the business model and the impact model, then structuring the deal, combining different financial instruments. So for example, equity and mezzanine, and also blending in grant elements where appropriate, and then reaching out to a network of more than 1,500 impact investors across Europe, and doing a deal-by-deal syndication between social business angels, social venture funds, family offices, foundations, or public co-investment schemes, that those investors can then really, let's say, invest on a deal-by-deal basis and support the ventures both financially, but also with non-financial support. And before showing, let's say, any specific cases, maybe just to give you an indication that we are working across the SDGs and basically sector agnostic, and with that could manage in the past to support, let's say, more than 70 ventures and raising more than 50 million euros. And we're also trying to building or to contribute towards a pan-European approach. Actually, now with a closed transaction in 8 member states, also use of the 7 that you see here, and then also France. But the focus is indeed still on the DACH region with Germany and Austria, but Benelux and CE, we are also, let's say, more and more working on. And obviously, I think we can especially bring value add to the table if a venture is interested in scaling from their home country, and also to involve, let's say, further European ventures. And before going to specific examples, I would want to briefly touch on, let's say, the type of ventures that we are working with, and also the type of ventures and social enterprises that we see as financeable in the market. And we would basically cluster them in 2, let's say, groups. And we see that there are specific, let's say, hybrid finance models feasible to finance both social enterprises that have a break-even potential, but also, maybe more interestingly, social enterprises without a structural, let's say, break-even potential. And if you just compare the 2 groups, so on the left-hand side, I think this is a classical revenue cost profile, where you have an enterprise that has a certain funding need until it reaches break-even, and then can, let's say, generate profits that can be used also to repay the investors. And even if the curve might be a bit flatter than in traditional or tech-oriented startups, I think you could still work with classical financial instruments, so be it equity, mezzanine, or also subordinated loans. I think what is more challenging the social enterprises from a structural perspective that you see on the right-hand side. So social enterprises that with all of their activities, let's say, don't have a break-even potential, so where the cost might always be higher than the generated revenue. And we basically see here two alternatives in how such a model could be financed. So one is basically the buildup of a hybrid model where you break up the activities in a for-profit and not-for-profit parts. The non-profit parts can be financed via grants. And the for-profit part then also with classical financial instruments like equity, mezzanine, and subordinated loan. I'll show you in a second how that would work. And we also see that there are more innovative financing tools developed in the market to basically internalize external effects. So like pay for success mechanisms like social impact bonds or social impact incentives, where you basically find an outcome payer who is paying for the generated impact of the individual enterprises. But we so far focus mainly on the buildup of hybrid models. And how could that look like? So initially, you would say that the initial muse is if there's no profit, there would also be no social investment, and that if the social enterprise can only be financed via grants. But from our potential, here is, from our perspective, here's a potential for hybrid financing, where you could basically, let's say, break up the business model and finance one part with grants and donations and the other part with repayable forms of financing. And how could it look like? We see many of our clients in the market that are structured also as hybrid organizations, where you have a not-for-profit entity that runs the charitable activities and it's financed by donations. And you have, on the other hand, a for-profit entity that runs a business activity and can be financed with investment. And then in the perfect scenario, the for-profit entity could generate profits that also then, let's say, finance a not-for-profit entity, so that in the end you have, let's say, a sustainable model that finances itself. And what we have also learned is that in these contexts, mezzanine financing can be a very useful feature that combines features on debt and equity, and is especially suitable for enterprises that are not looking for a traditional exit to a strategic investor, because you basically can provide the funding or patient funding to a social enterprise, and once the company has turned profitable, you can then also, let's say, pay back from the cash flows of the companies. Yeah, with many of the social enterprises that we are working with, this is an interesting, let's say, financing instrument that we use. But maybe let's look at some specific examples from our work also to illustrate it and give you a flavor of what kind of ventures we are working with. One example, Social B, Ashoka fellow from Germany, Zara Brun. In the aftermath of the migration refugee crisis in 2015, Zara developed a social temporary, let's say, employment firm that basically integrates migrants into the labor market and society. And they have a very interesting model where they basically take up the employer risk and employ those persons, also combine it with some integration measures, but also then, let's say, rent them to other companies, and also build a bridge so that after then 18 to 24 months, these people can usually, let's say, change into an entrepreneurship or into a qualified, let's say, employment contract. And Social B was set up as a not-for-profit entity in Germany, and we supported them in raising €500,000. And it's also an interesting structure where basically the donation of a foundation was combined with a subordinated loan of some private investors. And the business model is also quite interesting because they generate revenues from temporary employment contracts, but also get public support for the training and integration of migrants. That is one example. And another example, Surplus, also Ashoka fellow Raphael Fellmer from Berlin, tackling food waste. They basically are selling excess products online at certain discount prices. They started with so-called food saving supermarkets, so Rettermärkte in German, in Berlin. But then due to COVID also pivoted their model to a pure, let's say, online system where they basically, let's say, sell then excess food from producers and wholesalers and resell it via an online model now and certain abo packages, and that works quite nice. And from the impact side, you can easily see that the food waste challenge is really massive, and it's really tons, hundreds of tons of food that are thrown away. And if you can make it more efficient and use the food longer, then this obviously the direct contribution. And here we put together a 3+ million round, combining both convertible loans and also a mezzanine matching from the EaSI that we have put together. Last example from let's say cases with impact in Europe. Here also a German case, Academia Acker Company, and they have developed a concept of school gardens and kindergarten gardens that they offer to schools and kindergartens to really, let's say, have a one-stop solution that they can use to implement those gardens, to also enable young kids to familiarize themselves with gardening, which is often not the case in especially city areas and people from, let's say, neglected societal backgrounds that are not familiar with it, and they offer it as a service to schools and kindergartens. And they have also taken, let's say, the expertise that they have accumulated over the last years now to introduce office gardening concept for companies, and we help them raising 1 million round. I think also a combination of mezzanine equity. These were 3 cases showing impact on the let's say national level in Europe, but we're also working with social enterprises that are generating their impact in the global south, and happy to share also 3 examples on that. The first one is Ignitia, Lisa Smith, an Ashoka fellow from Sweden, who has developed an innovative and very precise weather forecast mechanism for smallholder farmers, especially in tropical regions, because in tropical region yield losses due to let's say instable weather are one of the main let's say drivers of yield loss. And they have Ignitia has developed a forecast that is super precise and is then sent as a text message to small scale farmers within a very easy and understandable language. And they can use this knowledge to let's say optimize along the whole farming cycle. And it's quite impressive. There are third-party studies showing that the usage of this forecast tool improves yields up to 80%. As you can imagine, small-scale farmers in these regions that are, let's say, fighting against poverty, and 80% increases is quite significant. And before we started the round, they already were serving 1.2 million, I think, small-scale farmers in West Africa. And we helped them to put together a 4.2 million growth round to further grow in Africa, but also to prepare the market entry in Brazil. And it's also an interesting, let's say, coalition, and maybe just to illustrate also the work that we're doing, and it's public information, so I'm also allowed to quote it. So Novastar Ventures invested in Ignitia, which is an African social venture fund. It was combined also IKEA invested their first, let's say, corporate impact investing in Ignitia, and it was combined also with a Nordic impact fund. Mercy Corp Ventures from the US joined, as well as our own investment fund, EaSI, but also the German development agency, DEG, invested with a forgivable loan. So also, I think, an interesting coalition of different investors that came together here. Another example, Helios, Martin Besian from Austria. They basically have developed the Wadi that you see in the picture as a device to, let's say, clean and healthy drinking water, especially in developing regions, because access to clear and clean drinking water is one of the major drivers behind many diseases. And how this model works is that people can put dirty water in glass or PET bottles and then expose it to the sun, and they really leverage an old mechanism, the power of the sun, to disinfect water. And the device body here shows then basically when the water is ready and can be used. It's WHO certified. They're mainly active in the Indian market. Maybe last example is from our, let's say, co-investment fund, where I briefly wanted to share a bit also the mechanics that we have set up. So the EaSI, as indicated before, is the first mezzanine fund across Europe, providing patient mezzanine capital to social enterprises, and covered also by guarantees from the European Commission from the EaSI program. And it's now a 12.5 million investment facility, which we closed finally, I think, in May. And it will most likely invest up to, let's say, 40 social enterprises, always as a co-investment scheme together with experienced direct investors. And I think the key feature is indeed the guarantee from the European Commission. And there we obtained a 3.2 million on initial targeted fund side of 20 million that we are, let's say, allowed to forgive. And I think just by the sheer magnitude of the guarantee, you can easily see that with the guarantee, the fund can adapt a much more patient approach and also finance less return aggressive social enterprises than such a fund or a traditional social venture fund would do. So we think that it's a very interesting financial innovation also to bring more patient capital into the ecosystem. And with that, we have also, let's say, now financed in total now actually up to 13 enterprises. You see already a few of the examples here. So already, let's say, a European portfolio, and let's say a few of the cases also that I have introduced you in my short presentation. I think that's it. And yeah, thanks a lot for your patience, and really looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Markus, for this presentation. Great to see. Great to hear some familiar cases as well. I think Surplus, and if I'm right, Ignitia did present once in the deal sharing events as well, if I remember well. And I saw also in the chat box the remark of Daniel saying that he also works with LIAISE. So small group, but also small world.
Indeed, yeah.
I have quite a few questions, but I also want to leave it to the audience to ask some questions. But maybe to kick it off with the first question. This session is also about better incubation, working with incubators. You mentioned something about the funding gap, but also the solutions that you see, you know, hybrid forms of finance to kind of solve this funding gap, and also to be able to fund companies that are not necessarily aiming to get to this breaking point. Do you work together with incubators, accelerators, and how would they best be equipped to help these companies get through this finance gap? Do you have some tips or advice, maybe?
I think it's a very good question, Martin. And I think there are different, let's say, areas, and then there could be, let's say, work with incubators and accelerators. I think on the one hand side, I think with many of those social enterprise or impact ventures that we have been working with, have been supported with incubators and accelerators before. So I could imagine that it could be interesting for some of you also to get access to a network of European impact investors for your ventures, that then after, let's say, your initial support and maybe after initial seed round for pre-Series A or Series A, it could be interesting to talk to us whether we see potential for your ventures also to get access to other European investors. And that, I think, will become more relevant the more international, I think, people will also want to expand. Because what we're seeing in the impact investing field is that there's still a strong and significant, let's say, home bias, so that people tend to invest in their home country, and that it's easier to to, let's say, to spin the narrative and the equity story if there is a relation to the location of the investor. So meaning if there was a venture from Benelux, it would be easier to attract German investors, for example, if there is an expansion from the Benelux region to across Europe or to Germany specific. If it was just, let's say, a North Italian venture only being active in North Italy, it might be much more challenging to attract also other, let's say, European investors. So I think that could be a concrete example. And we have also seen some, let's say, incubators, accelerators also work with investment arms. So I think also we have had some syndications where some accelerators also, let's say, invested in deals that we have put together, either being cash or also media for equity deals. And I think it can also help, last point, especially and I understand that this is also part of the Better Incubation project, that not all of you are working exclusively with impact ventures, but also, let's say, with traditional ventures. And I think that can help also to, let's say, bring more impact knowledge to the table, both in terms of impact measurement, but then also specifically connecting to impact investors.
Great. Thank you, Markus. I think there's great opportunities there for some of the registrants today. Anyone in the room have a question for Markus after his presentation? I see Francesca. Please.
Can I ask you, Markus, thank you for your presentation. And I'm curious about the main source for scouting that you have in the country, and for the last project that you present in Europe. You use incubator or accelerator, or you use other source for scouting startups?
Oh, very good question, Francesca. Thanks a lot. So indeed, let's say incubators and accelerators are, let's say, one source of let's say, pipeline for us. And given that we also initiated FASE together with Ashoka, and Ashoka is still the majority shareholder of FASE, so we have close ties. And Ashoka is also, let's say, watching the social entrepreneurship field very closely. So both in terms of fellows or future fellows in the pipeline case, and that is a strong, let's say, pipeline dimension. Also within EVPA, let's say, working quite closely together with other European impact investors, that some of their portfolio companies, let's say, then are, let's say, guided to us. So if they're interested in impact investors from other, let's say, jurisdictions. And we also have a good relationship with funds, for example, in Germany. Let's say, oh, this is an interesting company, but it's too early stage for us because it's still below 1 million revenue, for example. Go to FASE, and they help you with finding some earlier funding round. And last point, sometimes also we are approached by investors that say, oh, I have an interesting company. I would invest, I don't know, 100 or 200K in it, but they need another 500K. Can you maybe help in finding further investors?
Thank you, Markus. Thank you, Francesca. Are there more questions in the room?
I think Daniel has raised his hand.
Daniel, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if you've, in your work, have seen any trends, maybe specifically for for-profit social enterprises. Have you seen any trends in terms of the things they really struggle with, and sort of the number one reason why they come to you?
But I would say generally, let's say, access to funding is a challenge for many, let's say, enterprises that we are seeing. And I think for especially the for-profit, there is at least a traditional, let's say, funding scheme, and especially if ventures are on a VC trajectory, I think that's rather normal. From the hybrid side, it's actually a bit more complicated. And I would say that almost the hybrid, let's say, world is more difficult to take up because it's so complex and also so challenging for ventures. And generally, I think it's also fair to say that under the current macroeconomic conditions, I think the fundraising has become more complicated for almost all ventures that we are seeing, for two reasons. I would say one is that ventures that are active also in, let's say, in B2C markets, also having tough times to meet their revenue targets. So there is, let's say, pressure to meet their initial business targets. And the second point is that we're also seeing that generally investors seem to become more cautious and focusing more on the existing portfolio companies. So they are also much more reluctant to actually finance new ventures. And I think this is also actually reflected in the funding statistics, both I think in the European but also in the US market. If you look at let's say the initial venture capital financing, which has significantly dropped compared to last year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. That's not a good forecast to share, but I definitely recognize what you're saying. Lonneke, I see you have your hand raised. You're building a fund, right? So tell us about it a bit more before you ask your question. Curious to learn.
Well, we are indeed building an impact fund at the moment, where we are still looking into what we are actually going to do. We're going to launch it at the EVPA conference actually. So that's the due date for us. We're focused on financial, fiscal, and mental well-being in that particular fund. We try to address the valley of death, and still looking into how can we best support also to support the building the pipeline. So it's not only that we're going to wait until they are investment ready. The tickets will be between the 100,000 and 300,000, maybe 500,000 euros for each ticket. So we're not going to wait until or only focus on those who are already investment ready, but we also want to focus on building the pipeline. But you triggered me, Markus, in the beginning, giving this context, because if most impact investors, even though if they're impact first, are going to wait until they're investment ready, basically organizations like our organizations and other funds who are having a similar approach are investing in a pipeline, whilst the others are sort of making it themselves and being very cynical now. So forgive me for being cynical, are waiting until we invest enough to build their pipeline for them to make at least make their, let's say, investment revolving, and that's a careful estimation. And so how can we also as investors in pipelines make sure that we are not only the only ones who are going to invest in the pipeline? Because then, if I'm very cynical, my board would say, why are we investing in organizations where other organizations, funds, and companies are going to profit from?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very
how can I address that question with my board?
I think it's a very valid observation, Lonneke, and I think I'm not sure whether it can be easily addressed, because I think it's actually valid for at least two reasons. One is that we see, especially the initial funds that have started in the field, and if I take the German examples, let's say Bond Venture or Nanda, and they obviously, the funds get, if they are successful, they grow and they get larger. So I think Bond Venture has just closed this year, is fourth fund, I think 40 million, Ananda third fund 100 million. So with these larger funds, obviously comes also the obligation somehow to invest later stage. So this actually makes the situation in the early phases even worse, because they don't invest as early as they would have done, let's say, maybe with the first or the second fund. And I think the second part is then also really, let's say, regarding the how much, let's say, impact can be financed, or also patient impact. Because if you just think about a normal distribution, let's say impact and a return, and then if you look only for the top 10% cases on both sides, you end up maybe with funding only 1% of the total sample size. And our aspiration would be to make at least, let's say, the top 30 or top 50% of the impact cases financeable. And for that, I think we need more patient capital. And yeah, I think, to be honest, there is no magic behind it. And we see many cases where you cannot earn a 10x multiple. And it would be good to have more patient capital. And I think that the European Union is doing quite a good job in, let's say, providing catalytic capital. And that also now with in the new program period with InvestEU and the guarantees, some co-funding, let's say, activities. We should build smart solutions on how these early pipeline can be financed. And I think we often see that these entrepreneurs and inventors are working on the most pressing, let's say, problems of the world. And I think, just to use your word, it would be a bit cynical also to require from them that they provide the same, let's say, returns as a traditional startup would be. And to me, it sometimes feels that the impact investing ecosystem is still, let's say, mentally stuck in the 80s, where there was this pure neoclassical, let's say, paradigm that you can say we solve all problems at the world with business models. And on top of that, we also generate excess market rates that, at least in my small McKinsey brain, does not work out always.
Thank you, Markus. I completely agree with what you say. But by the way, only maybe one thing to remark is that what you see in the classical or the non-impact startup market is that there's a lot of talk on returns, but if we are quite honest and look into it, we see that all startup funding is rather struggling activity to be engaged in. And
that's actually a very good point, and that is maybe also something that the sector is too honest, but this is a good thing. But because if you actually look at traditional venture capital returns in Europe, they are not so promising. And I can tell you from having done now 1.5 years fundraising for the EaSIs, and we ended up with 12.5 million from initially, let's say, 20 that we aspired for. And we, let's say, indicated that the junior tranche could generate something like 4 to 4.5% return. And we got a lot of positive feedback on the concept, but people said, okay, if you would promise us 3x, then we can invest. Obviously, we don't want to promise 3x because we think it will be difficult to achieve. I think other, especially VC-driven investors, might be a bit less, let's say, cautious in their promises. And that I think should not be the best solution to that. But you see people that are trying to go that route. That's absolutely true.
No, I agree. But by now the VC sector and the startup sector has been investing long enough to create a whole bunch of cynical investors also in the regular startup system that maybe their cynicism can be turned towards investing in impact, and at least create the impact and not get the 3x instead of not getting the 3x and get a lot of annoyance. So maybe there's an opportunity there as well. I see one more hand raised. Christine, please.
Yes, thank you for this really valuable discussion and the points that you're raising. I was wondering if you can comment a little bit on the scene of impact investment in Europe. Do you see that the funds are being competitive with each other, or are they collaborating? And also, maybe there is a difference if there are appearing partnerships between the private impact funds and the funds that are being supported by the EU guarantees.
A very good question, Christine. I think generally I would say that the overall ecosystem is developing and growing. Generally, what I see is that at the moment, especially the, let's say, ecological impact, there is going, let's say, a lot of funds are going in that direction. So if I just take Germany as an example, that just the World Fund, I think 350 million just closed this year, and also Planet A, 150 million. Also Revent, also Clementum, I think a Danish, German corporation. So on the ecological field, we see a lot of traction, a lot of funds also, because I think there it's easier to promise and deliver, let's say, market rates of return. And I think on the social side, we see significant, let's say, less traction in terms also of new actors entering the field. And regarding competition, I would say generally I perceive that the ecosystem is very cooperative and people are working together. But sure, there's in specific situations there can also be competition with targets, with initial targets. What I hear from more and more, let's say, also EVP members, is that in some of their portfolio companies they're also competing with traditional VC investors, but that they can often bring, let's say, the impact mindset and also the impact methodology to the table, which is perceived as a value add.
Thank you, Markus. Thank you, Christine, for that question. You mentioned the World Fund. Actually, the last podcast that we recorded from the Impact Funds initiative was with Tim Schumacher of World Fund. So if you want to hear more about World Fund, I'm happy to share it. I've shared it in the chat, actually. I'd like to thank you, Markus, for your presentation and the great answers and discussion. I'd like to thank all the participants for a great discussion. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm sure Markus is available on email as well. If you have any additional topics you'd like to discuss further on. But I like to be conscious of time as well. And thank you all for being here, and hand over for some last words to back to Isabel.
Thank you, Martijn, and thank you also to you all for your contributions. So just to close, just a few thoughts in terms of our next steps and also our timeline. We have had a series of these meetings. So this was our last meeting for our Switch Pitch series. As you may have seen on our screen here, we had 6 meetings in total with a focus on different regions in Europe. We thank you very much for having joined us on this journey. And in parallel, we had our better incubation contest as well. So there were a period of application, evaluation, and the winners of this contest will actually pitch in a session on the 2nd of December during our EVPA Impact Week. And so this will also be our better incubation final event. So we hope you can join us there as well. It will be really great to see you there. And we thank you for having joined us today. I wish you a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you all. Thank you very much.